Well, hey there, good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever time it happens to be that you're tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us here at Calvary Evangelical Congregational Church Online. We're so glad that you're joining us here from wherever you happen to be joining us from. We are continuing with our series about spiritual growth. And this lesson is kind of a direct continuation from last week. I guess it's part 5 of the series, but it's kind of part 2 of what we talked about last week. And so it's a continuation. Now, before we get into that, we are going to worship through song before we engage in some worship through study. So I invite you, as the music is playing, to sing along and just really work to prepare your hearts for the study of God's Word. And then we'll come back here together in just a moment to worship through study. So we'll see you back here briefly.
Jesus, my glory, my soul.
So, like I said, we are this lesson and next week's lesson. It's kind of like a mini series within the series, like series Inception, kind of. So this is technically part two, but it's also part five of the series as a whole. But this is it's how do I want to phrase it? So we're talking about the stages of faith, and next week, we're going to get into the final two stages, 5 and 6. This week, we're focusing entirely on stage 4. And the reason for that is because stage 4 is such an important and misunderstood and difficult to describe stage that it really just requires its own lesson. Now, if you remember, last week we left off at stage 3. And it was kind of an awkward place to end because we ended with the admission that to move from stage 3 to stage 4 requires the sobering reality of a faith crisis that shakes the very foundations of what we believe, where everything that we knew, or everything we, not even everything we thought we knew, just everything we knew, comes into question. Everything we knew about what it means to be a Christian, about who God is, about how to live our faith, about what the church's job is actually supposed to be. Everything we thought we knew about the life following Jesus suddenly feels like it could come crashing down around us at any moment. And this is so important that we understand this, because there are far too many who think that a faith crisis has to be the end of faith, or that it doesn't belong, or it means there's something wrong with with me as an individual. If you're having that faith crisis, we feel like there's something wrong with us. There isn't. Okay, and so that's the transition from stage 3 into stage 4, is having this massive faith crisis, and it's not something that happens overnight. It's usually a series of things that lead to this faith crisis, and I will talk to you in detail about that a little later in the lesson. But that's what brings us into stage 4, and stage 4 we call the journey inward. This stage, arguably the most difficult stage of faith, is one that is permeated by deep, deep questioning and seeking. There is no certainty anymore. We still have maybe an integrity with God, but it is shaky and tense. And to those who, when we see other people at this stage, it often looks like they're losing their faith and not growing in it. But a distinction needs to be made here. We don't lose our faith like we lose our car keys, right? Where we don't misplace our faith at stage 4. Like, you just set your car keys down somewhere different than where you normally do, and suddenly they're lost. That's not what happens with our faith at stage 4. But our faith is not what it was. It's not secure. It's not as sure anymore. There are questions, many of them. And in a lot of ways, the questions are almost more important than the answers to the questions, because answers just kind of have a hollow ring to them. It's like when you're in the middle of crisis, knowing that God has a plan. Okay, I know that doesn't matter to me at this point. I don't need to know that He has a plan to know that this sucks and I don't like it, right? So the answers almost ring hollow. Ultimately, what happens at this stage is we're learning more on a deeper level about how faith impacts our lives beyond just the Sunday morning worship time. More about how our Sunday should actually fit in with our Monday through Saturday. How our faith is supposed to permeate and affect and influence every part of our being. And we see a really quite stunning example of the entrance to stage 4 in the life of Elijah on Mount Carmel. He goes and he challenges the prophets of Baal, and it's one of the most comical scenes in the book of Kings. He basically calls the people to believe in whichever god proves himself to be true by sending fire down to consume a sacrifice. So the prophets of Baal, they get this stuff, or they're doing what they're doing. They're calling on him. He's not answering. Elijah makes fun of Baal. It's a comical scene. But then it's Elijah's turn, and that's what I want to read with you this morning. It's quite a bit of scripture, but it's actually 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 30 through chapter 19, and I think I'm reading through verse, I think it's verse 5 that I'm reading all the way through, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, verse 5. So chapter 18, verses 30 through chapter 19, verse 5. So let's read this together. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near me." And so all the people approached him. Then he repaired the Lord's altar that had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel will be your name." And he built an altar with the stones in the name of the Lord. Then he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 4 gallons. Next he arranged the wood, cut up the bowl, and placed it on the wood. He said, "Fill 4 water pots with water, and pour it on the offering to be burned down on the wood." Then he said a second time, and they did it a second time. And he said a third time, and they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar. He even filled the trench with water. At the time for offering the evening sacrifice, the prophet Elijah approached the altar and said, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that at your word I have done all these things. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that this people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then the Lord's fire fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell face down and said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Then Elijah ordered them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let even one of them escape." So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Wadi Kishon and slaughtered them there. Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a rainstorm." So Ahab went to eat and drink, but Elijah went up to the summit of Carmel. He bent down on the ground and put his face between his knees. Then he said to his servant, "Go up and look toward the sea." So he went up, looked, and said, "There's nothing." 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." On the 7th time he reported, "There's a cloud as small as a man's hand coming up from the sea." Then Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, get your chariot ready and go down so the rain doesn't stop you." In a little while the sky grew dark with clouds and wind, and there was a downpour. So Ahab got in his chariot and went to Jezreel. The power of the Lord was on Elijah, and he tucked his mantle under his belt and ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "May the gods punish me and do so severely if I don't make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then Elijah became afraid and immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba that belonged to Judah, he left his servant there, but he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. He said, "I've had enough. Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Elijah has this literal mountaintop experience with God where God shows himself strong. And immediately after this amazing victory, he told something that kind of contradicts and stands in defiance of that victory. Jezebel says, "May I be punished ever so severely if I don't have you killed by this time tomorrow." We see Elijah enter this spiral of despair that ends in deep desperation, depression, and sorrow. He knows who God is intimately and personally, but this new experience doesn't jive with what he has experienced about God up to this point. His faith has been shaken. But in Elijah, we also see the proper response to this kind of faith-shaking experience. He shows us what we ought to do when we find ourselves in stage 4 in order to continue growing. It's to get real, to linger with what provokes you and acknowledge the reality of where you are. Elijah sat among the weeds of his questioning, and he allowed God to be God. He allowed God to kind of be the gardener, right? And to weed that garden. He didn't deny what happened or how he felt about it. I mean, he actually acknowledged the reality. I want to die. I've had enough. But he took that reality to Yahweh and he lingered with it, letting God be God. Effectively, Elijah doubted. Too many people think of doubt as a bad thing, but doubt is simply faith seeking answers. There's a difference between saying, I am not close to God, and not being bothered by it, and saying, I am close to God, and that bothers me. One's a statement of fact. The other's a dissatisfied statement of fact that implies a seeking to or a desire to resolve the distance. Now here's the rub with this stage of faith. When people hit this stage, to everyone else, it looks like the person is losing their faith or walking away from their faith. It looks like backsliding. Peter's an intense example of stage 4. At the arrest of Jesus and the events that followed, climaxing in Peter's 3-time denial of Jesus, it served as Peter's faith crisis that shook his faith tremendously. And before Jesus appeared to him on the 3rd day, we see Peter deciding he's going to go back and go fishing. He didn't lose faith, but his faith was so shocked and knocked loose that he went back to what was comfortable and familiar. We know Jesus' response to Peter. He didn't chastise him. He pursued, forgave, and restored him. And now the church, the church has a massive, so crucially important role to play in stage 4. If stage 4 is marked by intense questioning, then the church's role is to not shut down those who question. It's that simple, really. This is something I feel really passionate about, because too often what I have seen, and it frustrates the snot out of me, is people who have sincere, intense questions that they're genuinely seeking. They have these, how does this make sense with who God is, that they're asking, and they're trying to figure it out. They're being honest, and what they are met with by the church more often than not is to just have more faith. Or if that they really believed, they wouldn't have these questions that they did. And so that implies there's something wrong with them. And so people who have these questions, they hear that and they say, well, then maybe I never actually had faith, and this isn't real because there's not actually answers here. And so they walk away. People are made so often to feel that something is terribly wrong with them because of their doubts and the crisis that they're in. The hurt caused by this response from the church is directly responsible for the amount of people who walk away from faith when life gets difficult. It is inexcusable for the people of God, particularly those in leadership, to look condescendingly and question the validity of another person's faith simply because that person has questions. Oh, it is so frustrating to me that we do this. That we tell people, how dare you question? Why don't you just have more faith? Why don't you just believe better? If you actually had faith, you wouldn't doubt. You wouldn't have these questions. I hate that so strongly. It is BS of the highest order. The church's role is to close ranks around those in stage 4 and love and encourage them. It's not to rush them through the stage. It's not to dismiss their questions. It is to rally around them and say, no, this is okay. This is normal. We love you. We're going to walk with you through this. We'll sit in the dust and ash of your sorrow with you. It can take years to get through stage 4. We simply live life with them and we refuse to let them self-isolate, which is a major risk for people at this stage. It is our job, maybe even in a simple one-on-one format, to keep them connected. Leaders bear a responsibility to destigmatize this whole stage. So please hear me clearly. This stage is a necessary, albeit uncomfortable, point in the journey of faith. It is okay to be hurting, to have had your world and your foundation rocked to the core and feel like you have no certainty. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to ask them. Please ask them. We will be here to search for answers with you and love you and to be there with you and say, it's okay that that answer doesn't satisfy you. It's okay that you're not finding comfort in your search. We will be there with you. I wonder if you've noticed, we've been singing a lot more lament-based hymns in our Sunday morning gatherings, at least one per week. Do you ever wonder why I've made that structural change? Very simply because we have the privilege of lamenting with other people. Our job as the body of Christ is to lovingly, gently, and intentionally support and encourage those who find themselves in the pains of stage 4. It's a painful stage that calls into question what we thought we knew about God. As with all the other stages, it is possible and perhaps easier to get stuck here. And getting stuck here looks like a never-ceasing questioning, where the person embarks on an endless search for information, always learning but never coming to truth. You know what it actually looks like? It looks like the deconstruction movement, something I have been overly critical of historically. I have such empathy for it now. The deconstruction movement stems from people who had questions and were met with the response of just have more faith, or if you had faith, you wouldn't have these questions. The problem is they get stuck in an endless cycle of questioning and never, always learning but never landing at truth. Being stuck at this stage, it's a vicious circle. We have an opportunity to redeem that, to be open to questioning, to embrace questioning. Another stuck behavior is self-isolation, where the person feels that whether inward or outward with others, there's nowhere to turn to for support, and so they just block everybody out, or they return to safety and familiarity of an earlier stage, never to actually come back. Others, they'll walk away from faith entirely. And man, it's this stage is so vitally important, and I really believe that to see redemption on a broad scale, we have to understand that this is normal. We think too often that people who experience questioning are just backsliding or they're losing their faith, when in fact they're going through some intense, deep growing. And we would do well to support them and be with them and live with them to help them through this stage, knowing that it can take years. And you can move from stage 4. It's possible, but moving beyond stage 4 into stage 5 requires an incredibly difficult to describe pit stop that we could call a wall. So that's kind of stage 4 part 2 is the wall. The wall is where our will is met face to face with God's will. The best description of the wall, it actually comes from the book Critical Journey, and the authors describe the wall as follows. This experience is perhaps the most poignant example of mystery in the whole journey of faith. There's a deep sense of God at work in us in the wall experience, and at the same time we're at a loss to describe it. We enter the wall with fear and trepidation, but we become less afraid of being afraid because of God's leading. We're on holy ground. We're experiencing a pivotal moment when we feel drawn to surrender, knowing it will not be easy, but it will be worthwhile. We're dying to self and waiting to be reborn. Our experience of God at the wall takes on different nuances based on our personal needs for healing and renewal. Thus, the wall differs for everyone. Fundamentally, it has to do with slowly breaking through the barriers we have built between our will and a newer awareness of God in our lives. We have spent our own energy. We have come to the end of our ropes. We're ready to learn about freedom, the liberty of living without grasping. In a more profound sense than ever before, we have to let God be God and let God direct our lives. At the same time that we surrender our wills to be healed spiritually, we simultaneously begin to be healed psychologically. The wall experience is the place where the two, psychology and spirituality, converge. Up to this point, one can be religious, spiritual, or fruitful and not be healed psychologically, or vice versa. The healing itself is mysterious and profound, for it is the soul that is healed. Experiencing the wall is both frightening and unpredictable. The wall is not easy to move through, but for faith to continue growing, it is required that we move through it. We can't go over the wall, we can't go under it, we can't blow the wall up or dance around it. We have to go through, and of course, not everybody does. There are some who give up when they encounter the wall, and this usually leaves a person with a calcified bitterness and often results in a person living in a constant search for what faith failed to provide. Now, some of our resistance to the wall is in our pride. There's a struggle between our will and God's will and our desire or delusion of autonomy. We believe ourselves to be self-sufficient, and therefore we try to scale the wall by our own skill. And the other end of this is self-deprecation. This is where we refuse to accept God's free, unconditional, and enduring love by trying and failing to live up to just impossible standards. And so we try digging under, and that doesn't work. We miss the part when we try to dig under. We miss that part of the wall is coming to this deep and significant sense of God's love and acceptance for who we are in spite of ourselves. Now, another form of resistance is guilt and shame. The wall forces us to confront painful memories, pain caused by family, friends, the church, ourselves. Typically, these memories, they come with all sorts of gut-wrenching emotions, feelings, and pain. We're often unaware of the depths of our pain. We attempt to dance in front of the wall by refusing to just look into the darkness of our memories, and we try all sorts of substitutes. We try self-actualization. We try New Age philosophy, positive vibes, y'all. Maybe good physical conditioning. But again, the wall, it brings us to a deeper understanding of God's love and acceptance of us in spite of our humanness. Others think they can win in a game of wits against the wall, not realizing that for intellectuals, the wall requires a humbling of self, and at times it feels belittling, where we learn to accept God's will without debating it. Still, others resist it by their achievements. Maybe I can build a higher wall and use that to jump to the other side. That's an impossibility, because you'll never reach the top of the wall. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You have to go through it. And moving through the wall, as with moving through any other stage, is something we get to take no credit for. We patiently attend to the deep inner workings that the Spirit is doing within us. The wall has been referred to as the dark night of the soul because of how uncomfortable and difficult it can be. I told you I was going to talk about my experience in Moline a little bit more. My experience with moving into stage 4 and experiencing the wall, it actually started when I left the church where I was the youth pastor. That's where it all started. Because I left behind comfort and safety and stability and was forced to confront who God was for me. I was forced to figure out what it meant for me to live out my calling. And we did so by leaving basically our home base, our safety and our comfort, and moving into unknown territory. And I've told you how that played out at the church in Moline. And it was a nightmare. I mean, I started having certain questions about who God was. Like, okay, so who is God really to me? Just in leaving. Leaving itself was a difficult experience. Okay, God, I thought I understood your plans. I thought this, I thought you had put me here for, I thought this was it, and now it's not, and so I don't know what's next. And then we went to this this church, and okay, God, this seems like what you've got, and I feel like you're providing. You're doing these things. This is great. You're a provider, right? Oh man! And then everything happened at that church that resulted in so much pain, and anger and frustration, fear. My kids were afraid to go to church because of what happened, and it pissed me off. And whew, we everything we thought we knew just dismantled. I felt confident going in that I was going to be a pastor and that this is what I was supposed to do, and God was in it, so it was gonna work out fine. And then it didn't, and it left me, and I know Kelsey would agree. It left us. I mean, me. I can't speak for her, but it left me questioning everything about God. I remember at one point kind of having a shouting match with God, where I had basically said, if this is your people, I want nothing to do with it, and I don't even know if I want anything to do with you. I stopped ministry. We started we started in that church in April, and we were there for just under 6 months. And right at like that 6th month mark was when things blew up and we left. And that was in 2020. We didn't start in Hoople till 2021. And if I remember right, maybe I'm pretty sure it was 2021. And so from October of 2020 till we started in Hoople, we did not work in a church. We refused. We still went because at that point it was a habit more than anything. And I wrestled. Man, I hated church people. If I'm honest, I wanted nothing to do with them. I couldn't stand the idea of working for God. And it was such a hard time. This provider that I thought, this God that I believed in, had let me down in a remarkable way. And I'll tell you what kept me from walking away is having people in my life who came alongside me and told me that it's okay to be upset, that it was right to be upset, and to vent it at God. Let him have it effectively, right? They didn't try to rush me through what I felt. They didn't try to put me back in the game. They let me mourn. They let me be angry, and told me it was okay. What happened shouldn't have happened. And what it did is it showed me it wasn't God who hurt me. But maybe he disappointed me, right? Because he will disappoint us, but he doesn't wrong us. Maybe I was disappointed in him, but he didn't wrong me. He didn't hurt me. People hurt me. His people loved me back to health. His people, through their acceptance of my pain, their refusal to rush me through it or tell me that, there's a blessing in this in the middle of it, which is true but is unhelpful at the time. He worked through his people. And so I got to see this new understanding of God, not just as like provider and guide, but as comforter and sustainer. We felt, I said, so dismissive. When we got the call to come to Hoople, I was initially extremely reluctant. I was like, another small church. The last church I was in was small. I don't want to do that again. And so we're like, maybe I'll teach for a couple weekends and that'll be that. And so I went and I met with the board, and oh man, the first meeting was so, I was impressed. And then our first weekend in Hoople was my youngest daughter's birthday, and we got there and there were presents waiting for her, and it was wonderful, and it did so much to help my kids did a lot to help me and my wife, and we've been here ever since. And every step along the way, excuse me, has been incredibly healing. The hospitality that I said last week, don't dismiss hospitality, and the love that we experience. And again, just the healing that we were able to go through from that was something where we came out on the other side with this new understanding of God as comforter and sustainer, and kind of I don't know if reinvigorated is the right word, but with a renewed sense of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, in that people will hurt you, God will not, which sounds so simplistic, but it's that just that little shift in understanding who God was took shaking my faith so dramatically. And so I tell you that, I'm getting all emotional about it to let you know it is so normal to go through something that completely throws you off. And if you are willing to embrace the discomfort, to embrace the pain, and lean into it, and put in the work, and just trust the deep inner working that God is doing. Ask your questions, feel your feelings, be frustrated, be angry, mourn, weep, all of it. If you can do that and allow God to do the inner healing that He needs to do in who you are, to come out on the other side with a fuller understanding of who God is, that is going through stage 4. That's experiencing the wall. And I've in talking with Kelsey about this the last couple weeks, I'm not entirely sure. I know I've been in stage 4. I know I've spent time in the wall. I'm not sure that I've fully come out the other side. I think I have. I'm fairly confident about having gotten through the wall. But man, it is. Would I recommend stage 4 in the wall to people? It would be a qualified yes. A qualified in that you need to know what you're getting into. It's not easy. It is so difficult, but it is so worthwhile. Everything we went through that, from leaving adventure, being hurt and damaged by a community Christian, and then the healing we've had of joining Calvary and the Evangelical Congregational Church, was some of the most difficult, painful things that we have ever gone through. But I am grateful that I have gone through it because of where we have come. And so that is a very brief overview of stage 4 and the wall. It's difficult. It's normal. It's okay. If you've heard anything, please hear this questioning that happens, this deep stage of doubt, questioning that looks like a losing of faith. Please hear that it's normal, that it's okay for you to have questions, and you are encouraged to ask them. In church, hear me, when we see people who are in that stage, rally around them, encourage them. Don't tell them to have more faith. Don't tell them to believe better. Tell them this is normal. Be with them, feel with them, emote with them, and just be a place that's safe for them to heal. You guys do a good job of that. You did that with me and my family. That's what helps people endure stage 3, and it can take years, like I said, and it's stage 4 rather, and it's different for everybody. So that's where we're going to leave this. Kind of a different lesson than we are accustomed to. Next week we will kind of close out our talk of the stages of faith by looking at stages 5 and 6. But before we go, let's have a word of prayer. God, I thank you for your goodness, for your gentleness, Lord, for your comfort that you provide, and the way you sustain us through the dark nights of our soul. God, I thank you that you don't leave us when life gets difficult, but Lord, you draw near, and we meet you face to face, and you do that deep inner working within us. Lord, I pray that we would have a better understanding of faith crises as a whole, that they are not abnormal, that they're not a cause to walk away, but they are a cause to lean in closer. God, I thank you so much that you are so good, that you are so gracious to us and you love us so deeply. God, help us to have an understanding of that. Help us to love people well. Lord, to encourage people with questions to ask. We thank you for who you are and just that deep abiding love that you have. Lord, may we reflect that love to others. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. It has been good to be here with you. Like I said, next week we will talk about stages 5 and 6, and we should close out the discussion next week. And then the week after, we will be discussing some of the hindrances to growth. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us and sticking with us through this lesson. I know this was different and maybe a little long-winded. So thank you. Whether we see you guys online or we see you in person in Hoop Bowl at 10:30 on Sunday next week, wherever we happen to see you, we're looking forward to it. Until then, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his face continue to shine on you. We'll see you next week. Take care.